I'm Lindsay Jones. I'm a composer and sound designer for theater and film. And I want to just welcome you to this seminar on music licensing for theater. I'm going to start off by saying that I am not necessarily an expert in this. I am a person who has had a lot of experience in this realm, but music licensing is something that is large and confusing, as some of you already know. And so I'm going to do the best to sort of express what I know through my experience. I'm going to go through this presentation. And then at the end of it, if you have any questions, I would love to answer them. So please feel free to ask. Okay, let's get started. So what I'm going to cover here today is what the different types of licenses are, who's responsible for getting them, how do we get them, why licensing is important, and then finally, a small note from me about how to be kind to the people you work with. So we're going to start at the very beginning. Let's pretend like we're making a request for the first time. One of the requests that people usually ask is, I want to use a recording of a previously existing song in my show. What kind of license do I need to get? So in that case, what you're getting is something called a theatrical license. This is a specially negotiated license in which you are contacting the artist or the management of the artist or the estate of the artist or whoever manages that copyright holder's material. And you are making a specific agreement with that entity in order to be able to use their material in your dramatic production. Now, there are two kinds of rights that are covered in a theatrical license, and it's important for you to know what each of them are. The first one is known as performance rights. Performance rights are any rights pertaining to the actual recording of the song. So if you're like, I want to use this version of this song in my show, you want to obtain the performance rights, which allow you to use that actual recording. So for example, if we were going to use the Beatles in our show, we would want to contact Apple Records so that we would understand that we are trying to get the permission to use that recording in our show. Now, the other kind of rights that are covered in this theatrical license are called publishing rights. And this is about the song itself, the actual creation of the song. And these rights are particularly to the composers and the lyricists of the songs. So keep in mind, one is recording and the other is the people who created the song. And there are two different types of royalties that are paid for each of those things. So in the case of the Beatles, you would be saying, I've already paid my royalty to Apple Records for the recording part of it. Now I need to pay my royalties to Paul McCartney and John Lennon because they wrote the song that I would like to use in the show. So the way royalties are typically collected is they are collected by what we call performance rights organizations, PRO for short. Here's a list of what many of those organizations are. ASCAP, BMI, CSAC, and AMRA are all based in America. SOCAN is based in Canada. PRS is based in the UK. SACEM is in France. It goes on and on. There are different performing rights societies for most of the countries around the world. And the way they work is that when a song is heard in a public setting, whether that's on the radio, in a nightclub, any setting where it's being in a sort of public setting, film and television is another example. These performance rights societies track when those songs are being heard, and then they pay the appropriate royalties based upon how many times it was played, what the size of the audience was. They collect those things. That's typically how royalties work, and they pay both to the people who own the copyrights for the recording, as well as to the people who own the copyrights for the song themselves. And sometimes this can get kind of confusing. And one of the questions that I get quite frequently from people is somebody will say, well, can't I just get some kind of blanket license from these performing rights organizations that will cover any music in my show? So I don't necessarily have to negotiate with each individual copyright holder. Can't I just get something that indemnifies me entirely, and I just buy this one thing and I'm covered no matter what music I play? And I am so sorry to inform you of this, but in fact, the answer is no, you cannot do that. You're going to have to actually go to each individual copyright holder. And eventually people will always say, but I'm pretty sure I could do that. I know that I can just get a blanket license. I'm sorry, no, you cannot do that. It is not okay to do that. You must, in fact, negotiate the rights directly with the rights holder. That's just what it's got to be. And look, the blanket license thing is not crazy. It does happen, but it happens not in the context of theater. The where blanket license would come into play is, let's say you and I own a bar together, right? And we have a jukebox in that bar. And there are songs that are played in that jukebox. That jukebox is not the primary source of entertainment in the room. It's something that's background music. So we could buy a blanket license from ASCAP or BMI or any of the performing rights organizations. And it would basically cover, we're paying a royalty that says anytime that song is played in the bar, that's what it covered. Now, you could make a case, I guess, for like pre-show music in a play that sort of fits that same term. That's music that's playing in the background while the audience is sitting waiting for the show to start. But the minute the show starts, it's no longer background music. It's now a part of a new dramatic work. And that's really important to understand because this is the way that all copyright holders view how they're licensing their work. If you are taking something that already has a previously established value because it exists and people have already invested in it in some sort of financial way, you're adding the value of that material to your material, which in theory makes your material more valuable. That's what licensing is about gauging what is the level of value that is being added to your work by adding this previous work into it. And so that's why getting a theatrical license is so important. That is literally what it's for to do, is to make sure that you are covered in that way. Okay, we're going to talk more about how much money it costs to deal with a theatrical license because it varies widely. But let's keep moving on for now. Okay, another scenario that we get a lot is people say, I want to have a live performance of a previously existing song in my show. Okay, so we're not using the recording this time. This time, one of the actors who perform in the show will be performing the song live on stage, right? So now we don't need to worry about the recording rights anymore, but we do still need to get a theatrical license, and we do need to make sure that we're covering the publishing rights, which is the people who wrote the song. We're paying them for their song rights. But in addition to that, we're also looking at two more kinds of rights, grand rights and small rights. And let's talk through what each of those are. Grand rights are if you're using an entire song or several songs within a performance. The idea here is that if you're using the whole thing, the whole song, you're sort of using, to a certain degree, the artist who made it famous, who made it popular. Their likeness is also adding to the value of the song. So like if I use a song by Elvis Presley, I am not only singing that song, but I'm sort of evoking the sort of magnitude of Elvis, for lack of a better phrase. And therefore, that is actually adding value to the song. Now, if you're using several songs, a case could be made that says, well, gee, you're really sort of like actually representing this artistic entity within your show. And then those rights need to be negotiated separately, because now essentially your show may be viewed as a representative of that artistic entity. And so as a result, the licensing results differently, and you'll negotiate that separately. Small rights are if you use only a portion of a song. So like if you just want to use a verse, or you want to use like a verse and a chorus, there's no real hard and fast rules about this, but if a song's 3 minutes and you're using less than 90 seconds, you might be able to fall under the small rights content. Now, as you probably already guessed, grand rights equals more money and small rights equals less money. So by using only a segment of the song, it might not cost as much because you're you're not using the whole song and it's not necessarily moving into grand rights territory. Now, there are always some questions that people ask about the use of songs, particularly in a live setting. One of the questions I usually get a lot is, oh, can I quote a lyric from a song in my script without licensing? I'm not going to sing it. I promise no one will sing it. They're just going to say the words. And I'm sorry to inform you of this, but the answer, of course, is no. You cannot do that. You must, in fact, license any text that is used as dialogue in the show. If it comes from a song and it is being sort of evoked in that way, you've got to license it. Sometimes people say, okay, fine, I'm not going to say anything in the show. I promise I won't say anything. I'm just going to put it somewhere on like the set, or like it'll just be in a projection or something. I won't even say it. Do I have to license it? Do I need to license that? Or is that okay if I don't license it? I'm sorry. The answer is no. You have to license that as well. You can't have any place where the lyrics are displayed that are from the song. Again, that is part of the material. And then sometimes I get this question where people will be like, can I change the lyrics of a song to better match the moment in the show where it's being used? I promise it's really clever. And I think it's going to serve the show really well if I just change these words so that it really suits that moment better. And I mean, I don't see anything wrong with that, really. I mean, why not? I mean, if you're improving upon the song, I'm sure that's totally fine. No, what am I saying? Of course, the answer is no. You can't do that. You cannot change the lyrics of the song under any circumstances unless you get specific permission from the people who created the song. And believe me, if you're licensing the song, you're going to pay a certain amount of money for that. And if you're then asking to alter the song, that's going to get into even more money, which is just something for you to keep in mind. You can do it. I mean, it happens, but it may cost additional money. Who is responsible for obtaining the rights to use a song in a show? This can be somewhat intimidating, I think, particularly as a playwright, because you're like, well, this is my idea. Do I have to figure all this out before I write it into the show? And the answer is actually not really. There's only one person who can be responsible for obtaining the rights to use in the show, and that person is the producer. And there's a very simple reason for that. The producer is the person who controls the money that is enabled to make those deals. So that person who is the producer or entity, they can decide exactly how much money they would like to spend on licensing or not, and make those decisions independently. I can tell you with 100% certainty, the person who is absolutely not responsible for the licensing of the song is the sound designer. The sound designer is 100% not responsible for getting these rights. They cannot help you. They will offer you moral support and also some fairly crazy ass ideas on how to do it, which we're going to get into in a few minutes. But I can't help you beyond a certain point. This really does come down to the producer. How do the producers get these rights? Like, what's the process by which they apply for these things? Okay, they have to make sure that every copyright holder of the creative work agrees that you can use this song in your production. For performance rights, that usually means if we're using a recording, we have to get the permission of the record label that is the owner of that recording. In the publishing rights, we have to go to each songwriter listed on the song or their publisher or the entity that owns their song. And we have to make sure that they sign on and say, yes, this company can do this. So for example, if I want to use the Beatles and John Lennon's estate is totally fine with me using the song, but Paul McCartney says no, the answer, unfortunately, is no. When you're pursuing theatrical license and granted small rights, as I said before, you're going to need to contact the management of the artist or the estate of the artist. Whoever owns that artist's sort of likeness and material represents them as the person who will negotiate the use of it in the material. So let's talk for a second, since I've mentioned the Beatles, we're going to talk about the value of licensing and what it means. So the Beatles are one of the most successful musical acts in the history of music. If you choose to use, for example, music by the Beatles in your performance, you are invoking that entire legacy of success into your show, which means that by extension, it's going to cost more. So when you're making these choices about how to incorporate music into your show, as you may suspect, the popularity of a certain song can directly affect how much licensing is. So you should be informed when making these choices of saying like, oh, I'm just gonna, I'm sure it won't be that hard to get, the music of Marvin Gaye in my show. Well, it might not, but it may cost more because that music has a tremendous legacy of success behind it. And so as a result, licensors view that as a premium product that would be connected to a premium price. Now, the real question is, how much does a license cost? Okay, this is a really complicated question. And the truth is, there's no real answer. I mean, it could be anything, like even I don't necessarily know. They're all negotiated separately from one another. And a lot of the times, what a conversation is like between somebody who is applying for a license and somebody who is, trying to grant that license is usually goes something like this. Gee, I'd really like to negotiate. I'd like to negotiate with you so I can use the rights for that song. Is that great? How do we do that? Well, how much money have you got for that song? Well, I mean, not a lot of money. What do you mean? I probably something. How much money have you got for that song? So as you can see, it's really up to whatever rate the licensor decides to set. There's no set form. They can just basically say it's this, and that's what they can say it to be. Now, there are ways to hopefully maneuver that. If you can indicate to them like, hey, we're a low budget theater production, we're not necessarily rife with cash, that might make some sort of impression upon them. But the reality is they don't have to grant your rights. And that is also an important thing to understand. You can ask for the rights for a song, but you may not necessarily get it. It may be too expensive, or they may just be like, you know what? No. And they don't even have to give you a reason. And that's really difficult sometimes and frustrating, but it's important to have that in mind, that you may have your heart set on this song that is really going to make a difference in your production, and things just may not work out. The artist may not want their song associated with your show, or the artist may not want their song associated with any show, and you'll never be able to get past that, unfortunately. Now, look, I hear you, right? Right now you're thinking to yourself, like, this is really complicated. I mean, like, does it have to be this hard? I mean, what do we do? I appreciate where you're coming from, but it's important to understand that theater is not really the ideal vehicle for this licensing in the first place, right? If you think about film and television, film has a lot of money, TV has a lot of money, theater has less money. And in addition to that, film and television have literally people who are, their full-time job is working out the licensing of material. In theater, there's no one who does that job. Frequently, the people who do licensing conversations within theater are usually producers, managing directors. Shoot, I've been on shows where the production interns were the people negotiating these rights, because those were the people who had the time to do it. So it's important to understand that it is that you're already coming from a slight disadvantage by working in theater, because they've set the rates based upon what they think they can get from film and TV. And it's always sort of a bad news story to explain to people, actually, I work in an industry that does not have the same budgets as film and television. And we're going to need to negotiate these rates lower because I can't afford them. Now, I know this can all seem really daunting and frustrating. And hopefully the question you're asking yourself now is there a way I can help with this process? Like, can I make this any better? What can I do to hopefully guarantee a larger value of success in this property? Okay, there are some things you can do. The first thing is, I know that frequently when you deal with publishing companies, they tend to be faceless corporations, right? Who are just interested in making money. They're not necessarily people you can identify with. And don't get me wrong, if you look in the news today, you will see all kinds of big superstar legacy artists who are selling the rights to their catalog entirely to basically investment firms, with the idea that those investment firms buy those rights out wholesale, and then they've done that to make money. So if you come to them and say, hey, I'd like to borrow your song, and also, would it be okay if I don't pay you a lot of money? That's not why they bought those songs. It's a little bit different. And it's important to understand that. So what you can do to hopefully get around this is use your personal connections. And you may say to yourself, but I don't know anybody who knows this person. Perhaps, but perhaps not. I'm going to tell you a couple of different stories about how I used my personal connections to make licensing logjam sort of unjam, and we managed to use these songs. I was working one time on a show with a director who will remain nameless, but his initials are JC, and we were doing a production of Alice in Wonderland, which that director wanted to turn into a jukebox musical with a lot of really popular songs that we would put inside of that musical. In fact, one of the songs, all of these songs were crazy popular. In fact, one of the songs was called Popular, right? And so we were trying to figure out how to get these songs in there without spending $1 million. And there was this one song in particular that the director was absolutely like heartfelt, dead set on, had to have this song in the show. And we had already reached out to their publishing company and said, is there any way we can use this? And they weren't getting any response back. It's not usually that you get a no back. It's just you get nothing back and you're just sort of left there with nothing. So what we were trying to do was get anybody to pay attention to us. And so I said to the director, I said, hey, listen, I've got a great idea. What you should do is go on Facebook and on social media and be like, does anybody know the management company who manages this thing? Is there anybody who would be willing to put in a good word for us? And the director said, that sounds like a great idea. I'm not going to do that, but you could do it. And I'm like, all right, fine. So I did it. And I went on the internet and I did that. And believe it or not, within 24 hours, I had figured out a friend of mine who went to college with a person who worked in the office of the manager of this particular artist. They got us in the door. We wound up having a conversation explaining why the song was so important to us. And because we made this artistic appeal directly to the artists themselves, we were able to circumvent the sort of faceless corporation publishing company that's much more yes or no. And they said, okay, for this particular instance, we'll make this exception. Now, another example where I used personal connections, I was working on a show one time where we wanted to use a song by the Smiths. And we reached out to Johnny Marr, who is the person on the right in this picture. And his publishing company got back to us right away. No problem. However, Morrissey, the person on the left, the lead singer, did not get back to us. And in fact, he doesn't get back to anybody, as it turns out. He does not have a manager. He does not have an agent. He does not have a lawyer. He is virtually impossible to find and contact. And I don't think that that's necessarily accidental. And so as a result, we were like, we really need to get to Morrissey. So I remembered that I know somebody in Morrissey's band. So I called them and I was like, can you please help me? I need to get to Morrissey somehow. And he said, okay, look, There's a guy, I'm going to give you his number. You call him at this time on this date and he will talk to you. So I get this guy on the phone and I explain to him what we're trying to do. We need the song. All we need is Morrissey to say, yes, it's okay if we have it. Can you please help us? And the guy said, okay, you've convinced me. I will, I'm going to see him in a couple of days. I'll talk to him for you. And just before I hung up the phone with him, I said, hey, can I ask a question? Who are you? Like, how do you know him? Like, what relationship are you to him? And he said, oh, I'm his hairdresser. The only full-time person that Morrissey has on staff is a hairdresser. And thankfully, the hairdresser went to Morrissey, did his hair, made a case for us, and that is how we got the rights to that song. It just goes to show you that the traditional paths of getting something, there are other ways to get there if you really work it. So if you're having difficulty with licensing, don't be afraid to use your personal connections. Now, we talked about this already, but I think it's really important just for me to say this to you outright so that you really understand this perfectly, okay? What if my production can't get the rights? Can I still use the song anyway? I'm so sorry to inform you of this, but of course you already know the answer is no, of course you can't. No, you can't. It's called copyright law. You cannot take material that belongs to somebody else and take it without their permission and use it. You can't. And this brings us to a really important question. Why is licensing important? Why does it exist in the first place? Well, look, this is the thing you probably know more than anybody else. You're a copyright holder. If you've ever made a creative work in your life, you own the copyright to something. And imagine how you would feel if somebody took your work without your permission and used it to make money. You'd be upset. And that's how these people feel. Now, look, there are people all over the American theater who will tell you, look, it's probably fine. No one's going to know. It'll be fine. Okay. And I'm going to tell you something. Do not listen to these people. They make it seem so easy by telling you this. But I want to tell you, as a person who creates original music for a living, it's making my job significantly more difficult. Now, think about this, right? If I make music, right, and I'm writing music, custom music for shows, and I make, a little bit of money, and they're saying to me like, well, why do I need to pay your money for you to make my music when I can get all this music I want for free? And obviously free is going to win. It's like, bruh, you didn't get this music for free. You stole it. That's the difference. So it's not that. And I want to just say to you, original music is your friend, okay? Remember, original music probably costs a lot less than licensed music anyway, and it can be custom made to be exactly what you want. You want it to sound a certain way, just tell them. They'll make it that way. You can do it, and they can fix it if it's not right either, in a way that you can't adjust licensed music. Now, people will tell you things like, they probably won't find out. We'll run the show for just a short period of time. We'll get a cease and desist letter on the final weekend, and then the show will close. Okay, maybe, but a couple of things. Number one, they probably won't find out is a whole lot less reliable option nowadays since the invention of social media, because this has happened to friends of mine several times where they will use a song without authorized permission. They'll put it in their show, and then someone who is a fan of that artist will see that show and then go on Twitter and say, oh, I loved hearing your music in this play that I saw this weekend. And the artist will be like, what are you talking about? And then that's bad news. And that happens a lot in this day and age because artists are now so accessible to their fans through social media and vice versa. How can this be bad? Well, ostensibly, will immediately have you pull that piece of music from the show. You'll have to replace it with something else. And generally that happens almost always after the show is open, which means you can't retech it. So you can't bring all the designers back. So it's kind of a hot mess, number one. It can also result in financial penalties for the people who are producing the show. But more importantly there are two other things that people don't often take into account. If you are discovered using a song unauthorized, it can really affect your producer's chances of negotiating with licensing companies in the future. So like If you used a song without permission and got caught, and then later go back to that same company and say, hey, I wanted to get permission to use that song, they'll give you the permission, but they're going to charge you a premium for kind of screwing them over the first time. And also, the other thing that can happen is it can infect your reputation with licensing companies in the future. If you write a song in which you write a show in which music is used and it's not properly authorized, they're going to remember your name as well when you come back to the door and say, hey, I've got a brand new show, different producer. Well, guess what? Your name's still tied to that thing where they got taken by somebody else. So when in doubt, don't use things you don't have licensing for. It's really important. All right. How do I get out of this? What do I have to do? How can I protect myself as a playwright so that I can make sure that if something happens where we're not able to get the licensing, I still have a way to do my show? All right. The first thing is have a backup plan. If there's a song that you really want in the show and you're absolutely convinced it's the right song and nothing else will do, I hear you, but do your best to pick a song that might substitute for it just in case it doesn't work. Have a backup plan. Find a song that has a similar meaning or a similar vibe, right? I know that no song is exactly alike, but songs are similar in some ways. And if you do some research, you might be able to find something. Again, and I cannot stress this enough, original music is your friend here. You could literally come to a composer and say, hey, we wanted to use this song. We couldn't get it. Could you write a song that is in the style of that same song, but don't copy it exactly? And a composer has the ability to do that exact thing. And again, it will cost less than licensing it. I'm just saying. Finally, I want you to think about considering your choices when you put music into scripts. Is that song really important? Great. Is it not? Maybe not use it. Maybe not specify it. Maybe just say there's music played here. And now this comes to something I want to talk to all of you about. Because as a person who is a sound designer and creator of original music for theater, sometimes I'm plagued by a situation that I want to speak directly to you about. And that is, if you have a song that your play is dependent upon, if the plot somehow revolves around this song or this artist or any of that material, then I want you to fight as hard as you can to use that material in your show. You should absolutely do everything you can so that your artistic desires are fulfilled. And I support that 100%. However, if you're choosing songs to write into the stage directions because those songs meant something to you at the time you were writing the play, or you like 60s music and these are songs from the 60s that you think might work well there, but not necessarily dependent upon the plot, please, I'm begging you, please don't write those in the script. Now, here's why. The reason is that hopefully your play is going to have a long and varied life after its initial production. It will hopefully be done in as many theaters around the world as it can be. And you're going to have different collections of artists who are going to interpret your work and who are going to put different creative interpretations into what they do. When you prescribe all of the song choices into a play, you're significantly tying the hands of everybody who works on the show because they've got to always slot into that interpretation of those songs. And like I said, if the song is plot dependent, then by all means use it. But if it's just, hey, I like music a lot and this seems like a good song to use here, please describe it. You could even say it might sound like this, but give your collaborators a chance to use their own creativity to fulfill your vision as much as they can. That's part of the magic of theater, is you bringing your ideas to the table and everybody else bringing their ideas to the table. So allow that space for creativity for all of the artists involved, even if you never see them. I would really appreciate it and be so grateful to you. That ends my presentation. Thank you all so much. I'm happy to take any questions you have.